this episode, we pop across the pond to Kent, England, for a little beer talk with a Kiwi. We'll be chewing the fat with the irreverent Stu McKinlay. He's one half of the duo that brought the Yeastie Boys to life. We'll discuss his journey from Middle-earth to the Garden of England, and take a stripped-down look inside the world's smallest multinational brewery. Welcome to No Pants During the Pandemic. Hi, I'm Kevin Brooks, and this is No Pants During the Pandemic. Today I'm speaking with my favorite Kiwi, not named Jacinda Ardern. Please join me in welcoming the Yeastie Boys, Stu McKinlay. Hey Stu, how you doing, man?
Hey Kevin, I'm really good, and hello to all the listeners, some of whom hopefully I've met at some stage in the past. Dealing with lockdown as best we can, rolling with the punches, but I've got good beer and that's always a good start, as you know.
So Stu, why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself?
So Stu McKinlay is my full name. I was born in New Zealand and grew up there. Fell in love with beer through my dad's love of beer. He had grown up in Edinburgh when that was kind of one of the famous brewing cities in the world. And just have always been into food and drink, as I think a lot of us in the beer industry have been. Started doing a little bit of home brewing in sort of my teens and then into, my 20s, sort of on and off, and then became kind of really obsessed in my late 20s. And then in my early 30s, probably pretty late, these days for a lot of people, decided that I should start a brewing company. So leave my very lucrative past job, which would probably be even more lucrative now because I worked in data analysis and public health. So there's a lot of work for that, I'm sure, at the moment. To go off and start this brewery with a friend, Sam Possenniskie. He'd been an old friend from university, and we'd always kind of talked about starting a pub or a brewery or something together, as you do late at night, sort of after midnight, as you're sort of having your last drinks, or maybe you're sort of third to last.
So when did Sam and you start Yeastie Boys?
We started in 2008. We kicked it off as a sort of part-time gig with me on the sort of brewing and creative side and Sam on the sort of more financial and operational side. I already had an idea in my mind to use kind of excess capacity in other people's breweries, because most breweries in New Zealand at that stage were, there wasn't really a market for beer. People only got into it because they loved it. The market, like a lot of countries, was sort of tied up by, a duopoly. There was very little tap space, hardly any shelf space for anything. So most people were kind of only using, 30% of their capacity or something like that. And so I got a hold of a friend that I got to know over the years, rang him up and said, hey, can I brew one of my beers through, your brewery? And he said, yeah, sure. This was a place called Invercargill Brewing, and Steve Nally was the founder and owner and head brewer and general manager, toilet cleaner, everything, as he did in those days. I sent him the beer and he rung me up and said, look, hey man, there's no way we can brew 600 litres of this beer. It's, it's just too fucking good, Stu. We've got to brew 1,200 litres, which was his max capacity, and there's no way I sort of thought we could sell it at that stage. But we brewed it and we sold it within a day or so, and kind of the rest is history now, I guess. And 12 years down the track, we still don't own a brewery, but brew in 3 different countries around the world. We like to call ourselves the world's smallest multinational.
Well, let's pop back to New Zealand for a second. Apart from the fact that The Lord of the Rings was shot there, I don't think a lot of people know much about New Zealand. What can you tell me about the country?
Oh, it's COVID-free, almost, at the moment. So it's a bit of a dreamland at the moment, but it's a fairly long and narrow country. I mean, it's about the length of, I guess, the west coast of the US, and similar, I guess, in regards to the different climate. Whereas for us, it's the north is the warm, the winterless north, we call it, and then the south it's getting Arctic blasts right off the Southern Ocean.
New Zealand as well as Australia are enormous, which is funny because they don't look like it when you look at a globe.
New Zealand's so much bigger than people think, but it looks really small because the Pacific is enormous and we're right down at the bottom of the Pacific. If you ever see New Zealand superimposed across a map of Europe, it blows people's minds how big New Zealand is. What probably should blow your minds is how small Europe is, really. And Australia is around the same size as the US. It's a little bit smaller, I think, but it's right up there. So that's huge. But obviously, about 4% of Australia's land mass is habitable. The rest of it's just, a giant deserty mess in the middle.
And what's it like in Wellington?
It is generally a pretty conservative country, even though it's viewed as being quite liberal, I think, from around the world. But where I lived in the capital city, it's a pretty highly educated, liberal, fairly, well-to-do, highly paid sort of centre. Extremely windy, windiest city in the world, and with an amazing kind of arts and food and drink scene. Because the weather's pretty shit there, people are forced to be in bands or be really good at making food or drink or something like that. So there's a lot of indoor kind of culture there.
And they're better known for their wine than their beer.
Totally, yeah. And the beers sort of rode the coattails of it a little bit off the fact that New Zealand hops, have such a similar characteristic to New Zealand wine. And although Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc is kind of like, the famous export from New Zealand, to me it's sort of rather one-dimensional compared to what we do. We've got totally different wine growing regions all across the country, and everything from like very, very good cold climate red wines through to Bordeaux style warmer climate lighter reds up in the sort of North Island, some really fantastic whites that are not Sauvignon Blanc, which is really nice to see, especially like Chenin Blanc. I think there's some really nice Chenin Blanc in New Zealand, so much more diverse I think than a lot of people get to know of. We're not just sort of hobbits and Sauvignon Blanc, that's for sure.
When I was a kid, Australia was better known for their beer than New Zealand, probably because of those Paul Hogan Foster's ads. But New Zealand's quietly become a really good craft beer country. You guys were part of that, obviously. Epic, Invercargill, Renaissance, 8 Wired, and I'm sure I'm missing a bunch.
When I moved to the UK in 2015, I used to tell people here that New Zealand was probably about 4 or 5 years ahead of the UK scene at that time, and that was through a combination of things. And I think the most important one was that normalization of craft beer or good beer. The fact that you couldn't open a restaurant in my home city, the capital Wellington, without having like a really good beer list. It couldn't just be the good food, and the good wine. You had to have good beer as well. It could be small, but it had to be really good. I would still think that New Zealand is probably second in the world from all the places I visit after America for quality of beer and normalization of finding good beer everywhere. The UK's a very different kettle of fish, obviously, because they have such a strong traditional beer scene here. So there's almost two separate markets here in some ways. It certainly took me a couple of years to kind of get my head around how the market here, how it did exist at that time, and like how it looks like it will evolve.
When I first went to England, back to England, and craft had taken place, they were doing this combination of their tradition mashed up with American craft. So you would wind up with a 3% beer that you take a swig and it smacks you upside the head. It was big and boisterous, and it was very not English, but it was 3% alcohol. So it was, so you could just crush them. Sadly, I'm seeing that go away a little bit, and that's to me a big bummer. It seems like they're going a little too far into the New England IPA craze.
I think it's going to swing back. We saw that in New Zealand as well. It was there was a time where just after I had started Yeastie Boys, and I still had a day job. We were brewing on weekends or, running the business at nights and stuff like that, and just doing whatever I could to get by. And I used to have this day job where I gave up with public transport or trying to drive a car and park in our city and everything. So I got myself a motorbike, and I was commuting in and out on that. And when I was on the bus, I could just, have 3 or 4 pints after work and, bus home. But on the motorbike, I would walk into pubs and just look across the taps and think, there's nothing here that I feel like I can have like a pint of. I can only have a half pint, because every beer was like 7% plus. And that's changed a lot now. There's, again, as I say, that kind of normalization, that area where people realize they've got to pack a lot of flavor and interest into beers that are not going to scare people off. Because the early adopters are all into that. They're into the imperial stouts and all the Neepers and stuff like that. But in the end, you get a bit jaded if you drink that kind of stuff all the time. So I think a lot of people come back to, lagers and good solid pale ales and porters and things like that. We certainly saw it in New Zealand, and I'm starting to see a little bit here. And you've still got people like Burning Sky, who make just absolutely killer cask beer at the 3.5-4% mark, with all of the flavour that you'd want in an American pale ale, but with all of the nuance and beautiful delicate esters and things that you'd get in a classic English cask beer. So it's certainly possible to be influenced by the US and still keep your your UK roots sort of in place. I think it's just it's the Instagram culture, I guess. Everyone wants to have something that looks like a glass of orange juice.
Exactly. I mean, the funny thing, I guess, with that is, the trends are one thing, but the brewers all love, to an extent, that tradition. So it's like the brewers all love their old school cask beers, and I really can't think of a British and Scottish brewer worth their weight that doesn't make at least one old school beer, and it's probably only to make the brewer happy and have that available to him or her.
Maybe a couple of local pubs or something, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm the same, probably. Without a doubt, all of my favourite brewers in the UK are ones who make pretty classic style beers. I don't drink much in the kind of NEPA sort of realm or the big adjunct imperial stouts and stuff like that. I like classic old school imperial stouts and great IPAs, the likes of, Thornbridge Jaipur or something like that. And then, a lot of the Belgian influenced brewers here as well. To me, it's, anyone who has, something that they really stand for, I tend to really love. So like Lost and Grounded, great lagers. Utopian, where we're brewing now, great lagers. Mark Tranter's sort of, brilliant sort of Belgian style, Saison sort of scented sort of brewery. I think those are the ones that, tend to be the most interesting for me. And I drink a lot of old school. I drink a lot of Landlord. The local pub to our office in the middle of London there was Landlord on cask and always in great nick. And then there was a Harvey's pub down the road. I'd drink like 3% dark mild, and I'd know that I could go and meet someone there and drink 6 pints of that and still come home and work, no problem.
You guys are New Zealand based, but you start exporting your beer around the world. I was working with you when I was with Shelter Brothers in the United States. You were sending beer to Europe, I'm going to assume Southeast Asia, and then eventually you decide that this isn't quite working for you, so you start brewing in the UK.
We started exporting fairly early on, probably around 18 months after we started brewing in New Zealand. We started exporting to Australia and the US. We started sending off to like Hong Kong and Singapore and a little bit to China, Malaysia, a few other countries. And then one morning I woke up and I had an email from someone and they were inviting me to like come and brew in the UK for a festival for the Wetherspoon Pub Company, who some people will probably know, where you get your cheap pints at airports and stuff like that. But they do these sort of international festivals about twice a year where they invite brewers from all over the world and they'll come and brew a cask beer with like a traditional UK brewery. I read the email a few times and I didn't know if I should believe it or not. It just seemed a bit dodgy, and it was from like a Gmail address. And it had some quotes from, I think, Mitch Steele in it or something about what a great experience it was. And so I did a little bit of research, kind of figured out that it was definitely the right kind of, a real person. And then I rang up a friend of mine, kind of asked him if he knew what breweries, worked with this Wetherspoon thing and who we should sort of ask. And he said Adnams, without a doubt, they're the best on that sort of rotation, try and get them. So I replied to these people and said, hey, look, we'd love to come and do the beer if we can brew with Adnams. And they said yes. And so that all kicked it off. And then the penny just dropped. We were going to brew more for this single festival than we had brewed, in our entire 2 years of brewing in New Zealand. It was going to go out to about 907 pubs. So, we were brewing a hell of a lot of beer for it. I thought if we're going to go over and do this, we may as well use it for a research trip to see if, perhaps we could brew our beer there longer term. We're already contract brewers, so why not see if we can sort of figure something out? So we started to put the wheels in motion to sort of figure out if we could contract brew. We came over, we brewed the beer with Adnams, had a really, really good time. Went and did a tasting at a festival in London, which was on at the same time, just sort of perfect coincidence. So I ended up doing a tasting of our beer with Melissa Cole there. Sam and I both came over with like full suitcases of beer, 20 litres in each suitcase. So we did tastings all around the country, and all the beer was in these plastic bottles, which we call flagons, which you'd call growlers in the States. They were all kind of like 1.25 litres or 2 litres. yeah, we just took them everywhere, and people would see us pulling out what looked like a sort of old reused Coke bottle and pouring beer out of it. And we had like a beetroot saison, Rex Attitude, our 100% peat smoked beer. We had Gunnamatta, and I think we may have bought a little bit of Digital, our IPA as well. And people were just kind of blown away. They were like, oh my God, how did you bring all this beer all the way to the UK and it still be good in a plastic bottle for a start? And also just like, what the fuck is going on in New Zealand for you to be, bringing beer over like this that's, better than stuff we have here. And sort of at the end of that trip, we visited Brewdog up near Aberdeen, and they had already shown a bit of an interest in doing some contract brewing for us. And, it all went pretty well at the meeting with them. Very informal, just showed us around the brewery, and we shook hands over the deal of me sort of coming back in 6 months to a year to brew. So we got back to New Zealand, and then had to sort of like actually work out how we were going to do it in regards to moving my family over and, raising some money to sort of kick things off here and all that kind of stuff. The reason that idea all sort of gelled together, and it's really mostly in hindsight that I kind of work it out, is we had noticed from exporting pretty early on that we would see like a really good year or two of export to countries, and then it would sort of level off or start to downturn based on the fact that the local scene was getting better. Like Hong Kong, when we first started exporting there, had 4 breweries. I think now there's like 38 breweries and about 60 brands, and it's the same with other countries like Singapore and things like that. The local market like rises up, and you just get squeezed into the gaps there. And that is what had kind of like stopped us ever like thinking of seriously exporting to Europe or the UK, was that idea that it would become, novelty beer. We'd send like a container, it would go onto shelves, people would drink it would sell out really fast. But if we sent another container, it would be pretty difficult to sell that, if at all. So brewing here and sort of being part of the local market just seemed like the obvious thing to do. And opposite sides of the world, the original idea was, we can service, maybe the eastern seaboard of the US, Europe, and the UK from Britain, and then, Southeast Asia and Australia and New Zealand from New Zealand. And
one of the huge benefits of you brewing in the UK is obviously it brings the price down. And once again, as we were discussing before, New Zealand is huge, but so is the Pacific. So a container, you're going to be shipping this beer on water to the west coast of the United States or to England, it gets expensive. So you brewing in England is going to significantly drop the price of this beer. Now it's no longer an import, it's a domestic, so you're dealing with not having the additional duties plus the shipping. You now can sell a ton of this beer in the United Kingdom.
The thing we really noticed is that like just the time to turn around to changing markets is the big thing, because 6 weeks on the water coming across, is a big issue if someone suddenly needs more beer, because you got to brew it in New Zealand and then ship it over the 6 weeks. Whereas here we can like adapt a lot quicker, so we can like push a batch back of something and bring in a batch of something else just to sort of fill that extra capacity if suddenly there's a rush on one of the beers. And of course, there's nothing better than being in market to know what's happening in the market and how your beer's going. Because when you send beer to another country, like to whoever it might go to, no matter how much you keep your ear to the ground and you sort of try and work really hard with them to look after things and do the right thing, you just never quite get it right, because every importer has a portfolio of some description and you're just one of their beers. Whether that's one of 50 breweries or 5, you're still only going to get a certain amount of attention. For us being here, we get 100% attention from our team. It's much better. And then, as you say, with the Pacific being so big, New Zealand is a country of 5 million people. Within a 4-hour flight of us, we have a population of around 20 million, whereas in the UK, within 4 hours flight of us, we have a population of around 400 million. So, it's a bit of a no-brainer.
You guys started brewing in the UK, and you basically picked your family up, and you guys moved from Wellington to Kent.
Or London first, but then Kent, yeah.
What was that like?
At first we had like a little bit of a kind of like thought that we might stay in London, but we very quickly realised that was going to be just awful. We're going to live in a shithole and pay way too much rent, and the kids would go to 3 different schools, and you just can't do it unless you have your kids there and kind of like, plan everything around it, and you're earning kind of London wages, which obviously you don't really earn when you sort of run a small brewery. So we moved down to Kent. It's not that much cheaper than London really, but you get a house 3 or 4 times the size, have a proper backyard, we can have a trampoline, we can have dogs, we can do all the kind of things that we would want to do. We've got great countryside around us, great traditional pubs. We live in an area called the Weald. We're in a town called Sevenoaks, and the Weald is essentially like a chalk hill that runs across the south of England, just south of London. There's actually 3 kind of like hills. One's called the North Downs, there's the Weald, and there's the South Downs. We're right on the end of one of these ones, so we're up on a hill. We can ride up hills a little bit to like look over the big downs below us and everything, and absolutely gorgeous. Like as beautiful countryside as I've ever seen in my life, and with amazing seasons, the greenest greens I've ever seen, and so many of them. In the spring, and then summer's beautiful. It's like light at 3:30 a.m. and doesn't get dark till 11 p.m. or something. So it's a great time if you like walking or sitting outside in pubs and stuff like I do. And then autumn, which we're in at the moment, or fall as you would call them, absolutely spectacular as well. All of the colours that you would expect from, up in New England, I guess, in the US. And I'm sure lots of the rest of the US gets that as well. Winter is, tough, but if you love pubs, it's great because it's dark at like 3:30 p.m. and a cozy pub with a roaring fire and nice and cold is great.
UK's winter is definitely dreary. That would probably be the best word I could use to describe the winter there.
If you live in a place like I do, it's quite different from like London. London's grey. It's a city and the skies are always grey, whereas at least we have, even if all the leaves have fallen off, we do have a lot of forest around us, and, it's just a different look. And you get that low sun. When you get low sun through a forest without any leaves, it's great. It's like a Sopranos kind of, murder scene or something.
We get that a lot here this time of year.
I quite like that, especially when you've got like a beautiful little pub that you're walking to, and you can feel the crisp ground under your feet as you're walking to it. 40 minutes from our house to my favourite pub as a walk. It's a 5-minute drive or a 40-minute walk. When I get there, you feel like you deserve like a really good hearty meal and a couple of pints and cask beer, fireplace, a nice sort of casserole or stew or a pie or something like that. It's just like brilliant. My Scottish parents must have given me the genes to like absolutely love the seasons and the and especially the the darkness.
It's still in my genes too, because it's like I'll find a place like that. Even in the United States, I'll find one of those dark pubs with the fireplace and they have cask beer, and then you just all of a sudden like I'm at home. It hasn't been home for my family, for 400 years.
Yeah.
So you guys start brewing in the UK, but then you start brewing in Australia as well to make sure you get fresh beer to Australia.
So after we sort of came to the UK and sort of felt like things were sort of, kicking off quite well here, we started to sort of look at Australia, and Australia had really dipped. That had gone from a business that was, a big portion of our market down to a very, very tiny part of that was some growth in New Zealand, but the other part was just it was just like ebbing away every year in Australia, and we were with like a really big importer there where we were like the kind of tiny little crafty kind of fun folk in their portfolio, and we had some other friends there who had been importing for a long time, mostly European beers, but they do a bit of American stuff. They had built a brewery. It's called Nomad. It's in Sydney, and it was a joint venture between them as importers and the family who owned Birra del Borgo. So I approached them and said, hey, look, we're sort of thinking of changing up how we do things in Australia. What about brewing Yeastie Boys in Australia? And they just totally took to it, like a duck to water. Brew the beer, have it, it's a huge part of their own tap room and everything. It's not just like they do it on the side. They've just taken over the whole brand completely and become really, really good partners. That's the ultimate for me, is like when you work with people who you're good friends with and it's a business success as well, it's the best.
So you moved to UK What happened to Sam?
When I moved to the UK, Sam was still like only part-time in the business. After a while here, I was like working so hard because I was doing everything when I came over here. My wife was doing a bit of unpaid work for us and I was just working ridiculous hours, but having a lot of fun because it was a new market, super exciting. Like our beer was in there. We were like glory boys, for the first year or so that we were here. The adrenaline really, really took me through. And then as we started to sort of work out, like what our next steps were going to be, I convinced Sam to come into the business for 3 years full time to come and help us. He never really wanted to work full time in the business. He likes the kind of fun side of the beer business rather than all the work that happens behind the scenes. So he sort of enjoys it more as a sort of board member and someone who, gets to sort of feel like he's part of the brand. And so I convinced him to come into the business, and part of that was that he would come over and work here for a few years. So Sam moved over so he started working full-time for us in November 2017. So he's just finished his 3 years. He's just gone back to being a board member now. So he's moved back to New Zealand. But after about 6 months of working full-time, which is a lot of tidying up New Zealand stuff before he moved over here, he came over and spent 2.5 years here, which originally was to help us grow a lot and for me to concentrate on some stuff other than, the operational and logistics sort of side of the business. But essentially in the end, what it became is the shit shoveler, I guess. He came over because around that time, we lost our contract brewing with Brewdog and we had to move to a new brewery, and then we really, really struggled with them quality-wise for a couple of years, and then we had to find another brewery. So we spent a lot of time looking for new brewers or just, working hard. At one stage, we were working across 3 different breweries to get stuff done and keep up with demand and things like that. And then COVID hit. And, so he spent a lot of his time working on making sure that all of the possible government support we could get would be adhering to the right compliance and receiving all the right kind of subsidies for staff and everything, because our number one goal immediately was like, we've got a really good team, we've just sort of all got together and comfortable with each other, let's keep each other together, because it would have been very easy to lay everyone off on day one and just consolidate cash in the business and do what we could.
You've got 5 employees or so in the UK, but how does the company as a whole deal with this?
As funny, as I said early on, I used to work in public health data analysis, and the longest chunk of my time was in communicable disease, working with all the people in New Zealand who have ended up kind of handling the pandemic down there. So I was pretty interested in news pretty early on, and then, wary of what was coming, but, I don't think anyone could have quite guessed how it would sort of play out in the end. I had a really, really busy month in February. We do a New Zealand Beer Month here, which is generally a very quiet time of the year, but we managed to sell a lot of beer, so we work with the New Zealand Beer Collective on that. And then at the end of that, I flew down to Tampa for Punapu Day for Cigar City. And as we were standing in queue to get through, immigration, we saw the news that they had just stopped all flights in from Europe. So we were on basically the last flight in. The next day, we went and had a few beers around Tampa, and late that afternoon we got the news that the festival was going to be cancelled. We ended up just having a couple of days kind of going around trying some beers and meeting a few people and things. And then I had originally been planning to go up to New York and, maybe come down and see you, but that kind of pretty much, had been put out the window. So as soon as I saw that things were going to become a little bit difficult. But I did go up to Portland, Maine, to visit a friend up there who had talked a little bit about potentially kind of running Yeastie Boys US if we kind of ended up starting to brew there. But things were shutting down, very, very quickly there, and including flights and the airport and everything. So I booked on an earlier flight back and managed to sneak out just before. I probably would have got to the point where I may have had to be sticking around for a week or two, trying to find a way to get back to the UK. So that was a pretty crazy time. But already, with Sam here, kind of working with the team and having a really good team here, they set up a web shop that we'd never had before. They kind of had just, put all of these things into place to kind of work out what we were going to do. It became really, really clear that there was going to be a big lockdown in the UK. Really quickly, the government announced some support for businesses. One of them was called the furlough scheme. It's essentially all of your staff can sit at home and 80% of their pay up to a certain level would be paid by the government. So we did that basically with the whole team, including myself. As soon as I got back, we just put ourselves all onto that furlough scheme. Sam, who's employed through the New Zealand business, just stayed on and worked. And we just started setting up twice weekly meetings where we would catch up Tuesday mornings for a sort of proper work catch up, so Sam could ask, stuff around anything that he needed help on, or we could chip in ideas with things that we'd been thinking about that he could work on. And then on a Friday afternoon, we would just have a few beers and a bit of a chat and just sort of make sure that everyone was sort of feeling okay and everything. And I had another staff member, our sales manager, who I would call basically every day. He was living alone, so we had two flatmates, one of whom had COVID, so it was sitting in his room, unable to do anything. And then the other one had gone back to New Zealand for a holiday and was stuck there, unable to come back. So that our sales manager was basically confined to his room for around 2 months, barely able to go outside. So I would call him and we'd have a beer and just a bit of a catch up and a laugh every day, just to make sure that he was okay, because his lockdown life was the opposite of mine. I was living in spring and beautiful countryside, going for bike rides with my kids and generally having a pretty good time, and having the first rest for about 5 years after working really, really hard to get our business up and running here. And Alistair was in a room not much bigger than his double bed, trying to sort of figure out what to do each day, running out of Netflix shows to watch and things like that. So it was nice to have a beer with him most days and have a bit of a catch up, and we just did the same with all our team, just sort of keep letting them know that the key thing for us was that we feel like we've got a good team together and we want to be there on the other side, to all work together, and just that we hold as much cash as we can in the business, use all the government support we can, and not try to sort of do anything silly and pretend there's a market that isn't there at the moment, because it really has disappeared. London essentially emptied completely. You could walk around London and not see people on the street for a mile or two, and there's still parts of it that are a little bit like that now.
Sounds a lot like what New York has, which New York and London I think are incredibly similar cities. They're both about 9 million people, but they're both virtually ghost towns right now.
When you walk around central London, you can tell that, right in the centre, from the West End, around, Soho and Buckingham Palace and Westminster Abbey and stuff like that, through to, the Tower of London, which is where the city is as well, where all the bankers work and everything. It's a couple of miles, 2 or 3 miles, something, right along the river, and at any time of day, generally, that would be heaving, absolutely heaving, and a good percentage of that is tourists, of course. That's where all the things to view. If you're going to tick your book of 4 days in London or something, you're going to see them all along there. And they just disappeared, of course, because 95 to 98% of tourist travel, I think, is gone.
For those who don't know, the city, quote unquote, of London is only a little central part of what London is. London includes, going south of the Thames, to the west, to the east, out towards Heathrow. But the city of London is just the center of that.
Yeah, the city of London is kind of like Wall Street kind of area, I guess.
It's the traditional, the
old
basically the medieval city of London.
Yeah, the walled kind of area. And that's the kind of place that I think it's a really small population who live there. It's something like 200,000 people live there, but I think on any given day, there's about 2 million people working there. So it's a commuter city. And now, you imagine that kind of idea where 90% of the population on a day-to-day basis has disappeared. And it's busy all the time because, of course, the people who come in and work there are the kind of people who arrive at 6 in the morning and are out boozing and eating and drinking with clients in the evening as well. So it's, it's a really, really busy place all the time, except Sunday. You walk around on a Sunday around that area and it's completely dead. And now it's like Sunday every day. Or as Morrissey would say, every day is like Sunday.
You're a little bit younger than me. I'm surprised you're that much of a Smiths / Morrissey fan.
My 3 oldest siblings are all around 10 years older than me. So, by the mid-80s, when I was 10, they were all approaching 20. So that's my huge kind of musical influences is kind of like, probably 77 through to 85.
Anyway, we're a little off topic, but I appreciate all the time you've spent with me this evening, and the beer you sent me, and best of luck during all of this. It's we're heading into what could be another long dark winter, and I wish you the best of luck, and thank you.
Thank you, and I wish you the best of luck too. It won't be as cold here, but it's going to be long and dark. But spring is coming, and we'll be okay, I think. I have faith in humanity. Even though it's every day it's tested, that faith, it's, I think in general we're surrounded by good people. It's just really, really easy to hear the not so good ones. So, we'll be all right. And if nothing else, we at least have like a couple of years worth of great beer in stock that, as I said, just gets better and better. So, we'll drink ourselves to death if things go really bad.
Sounds good, Stu. If you'd like to learn more about the Yeastie Boys, you can check out their website or their social media accounts. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. I had this whole setup for you, and I totally spaced on it, which was, you have a habit of being pantsless.
I was ready to go as well. I am pantless right now. Someone just messaged me the other day, and they said they were looking through my Instagram, and they loved that photo of me in my underwear. And I was like, I said, I've got no photo of me in my underwear. And then I said, oh, hang on, you're not talking about my personal account. You're talking about my work account. There's no photos of me in my personal account in my underwear, but there's loads on the Yeastie Boys account.
I mean, that was the first one, wasn't it?
I know, the first pantless one, because in New Zealand I was well known for like colourful trousers. That was kind of my thing. But the first pantless picture, I think, of me on the internet is actually a photo that I sent to Chris Neer. It was like a summer kind of tweet where he said, it's so hot that I'm, I'm sitting in like shorts and a singlet at like 10 p.m. or something. And I replied and said, it's so hot down south that like I'm completely naked. And he said photos or it didn't happen. So I sent him a selfie. I took it from above and I was completely naked, but I had a pint glass in my hand and, from the angle, I was just covering my nether regions with my pint glass. And, I replied to him within like 30 seconds of him, because I actually was naked at the time when I tweeted him. And that kind of like got a little bit of, went around a bit. And then just since then, I've kind of like, I've had lots of photos of me in underwear generally, maybe occasionally with no underwear at all, but definitely pantless.
Well, you had one just last week, right? You had the quarantine.
That was like a few days into the lockdown.
But you just reposted them then, because I mean, literally, it was like last week I saw them.
Are you pantsless now?
I am, yeah. Why wouldn't you work from home pantsless? So you're still recording, did you say?
Yes and no. Thank you very much. Nice balls.